Alan Woodward remains one of the most criminally underrated English footballers of his generation. At Sheffield United, Woody wasn't simply another right winger. He was one of their great attacking players. Fast, direct, powerful, and capable of scoring goals normally expected from centre forwards.
This penalty, and Woodward has already scored from 6 this season. That's 7.
Woodward made 538 league appearances for the Blades and scored 158 goals. He finished as Sheffield United's leading scorer in 7 different seasons. Yet despite those numbers, his name never received anything close to the national recognition enjoyed by many of his contemporaries. And one fact makes that particularly difficult to understand. Alan Woodward never won a senior England cap. Not one. At Bramall Lane, however, supporters knew exactly what they had. They watched Woody punish defenders from the right, produce goals year after year, and become one of the club's most dependable attacking weapons. Then Tony Currie arrived. Currie brought imagination, flair, and personality. Woody brought pace, movement, power, and devastating end product. Together, Sir Woody and Currie formed one of Sheffield United's great attacking partnerships. Their understanding became special. Currie could spot the opening. Woody could make the run. And when the two combined, defenders often struggled to stop what came next. Years later, Currie's verdict on Woody would reveal just how highly he rated his old partner. But that remarkable assessment can wait, because Woodward's career presents a bigger mystery first. The performances were there. The goals were there. The longevity was there. Yet England never called, and outside Sheffield, his reputation gradually faded behind more celebrated names of the era. That is what makes Woody's story so compelling. He wasn't a forgotten footballer whose greatness needed to be invented years later. He was a great footballer whose recognition never matched what he produced on the pitch. And the deeper you look into Alan Woodward's career, the stronger the case becomes that English football criminally underrated him. Subscribe for more stories of legendary footballers like Alan Woodward, brilliant, overlooked, and deserving of far greater recognition. Years after Alan Woodward had left Bramall Lane, some remarkable judgments about him were still being made by men who knew his football firsthand. Tony Currie's was the most striking. Woody was the greatest I ever played with. Currie had represented England and spent his career alongside outstanding footballers, which gave those words considerable weight. He had also known Woodward at his peak, sharing the pitch with him week after week. But admiration for Woody extended beyond his famous partner. Neil Warnock had watched him from the Bramall Lane terraces as a youngster. After later spending decades as a manager and seeing generations of professional players, Warnock still reached an extraordinary conclusion. Woodward was the best crosser I've ever seen. He particularly remembered the danger of Woody's corners. They could arrive with such pace that defending them became an ordeal rather than a routine set piece. Woodward's manager, John Harris, offered an even more intriguing assessment. Alan simply has no conception of how much talent he has. It was an unusual thing for a manager to say about one of his own players. Harris wasn't questioning whether Woody had ability. He was suggesting that Woodward himself might not have understood just how much he possessed. Former teammate Andy Keeley remembered another unforgettable feature of his game, the power with which he struck the ball. Keeley recalled one effort from around 30 yards when Woodward recovered from a slight miscontrol and then smashed the ball into the top corner. Gary Hampson also carried Woodward's reputation with him long after their time together. Even after playing alongside highly accomplished footballers elsewhere, he still regarded Woody as a fantastic player and among the finest he had played with. These weren't opinions manufactured after Woodward's death to make an old player sound greater than he was. The admiration had followed him for years, and it came from people who had experienced his football from very different positions inside the game. That matters, because reputations can fade, statistics can lose their context, and younger generations can forget a name entirely. But the people who actually experienced Alan Woodward at close range never seem to forget what they had witnessed. The reason becomes clear when you look at the weapons Woody possessed once a football was at his feet. Alan Woodward's reputation was built on more than admiration. By the early 1970s, the numbers were proving it. Sheffield United were pushing for promotion back to the First Division. Woody played a major part in that campaign and finished with 15 league goals. Promotion was secured. Then came the real test. Could he produce at the highest domestic level? The answer came almost immediately. From August 1971, newly promoted Sheffield United began the First Division season with a remarkable unbeaten run. They went through their opening 10 league matches without defeat, winning 8 of them and briefly climbing to the top of the table. Woodward was no longer proving himself in the Second Division. He was doing it against the best teams in England. Then came 27 November 1971. Ipswich Town visited Bramall Lane. Sheffield United won 7-0. Woody scored 4. It became one of the clearest examples of just how destructive he could be when everything came together. But one huge afternoon didn't define his career. His consistency mattered even more. In 1973-74, Woodward appeared in all 42 First Division matches and scored 17 league goals. For a player operating from the right, that was an exceptional return. It also placed him among some of the division's most productive attacking players that season. And Sheffield United continued to improve. In 1974-75, the Blades finished 6th in the First Division. Under the old 2 points for a win system, they ended only 4 points behind champions Derby County. Woodward had now been central to a side that had won promotion, returned strongly to the top flight, produced major results, and climbed close to the top of English football. This is where the idea of Woody as merely a local favourite starts to fall apart. He wasn't living on reputation. He was producing against First Division opposition, week after week, season after season. And during that rise, his understanding with Tony Currie became one of Sheffield United's greatest strengths. The two were different players, but together, they gave the Blades an attacking combination that defenders struggled to contain. And what Currie later said about that partnership would only make Woodward's lack of England recognition even harder to understand. Alan Woodward had helped Sheffield United back into the First Division. By 1974, he was scoring 17 league goals in a top-flight season. Yet one thing never changed. England still didn't call. Woodward had already represented England at youth level and later appeared for the Football League 11, but a senior international cap never arrived. For supporters at Bramall Lane, the omission became increasingly difficult to understand. The strongest explanation was tactical. Under Alf Ramsey, England had moved away from traditional wingers. The famous 1966 World Cup winning side became known as the Wingless Wonders, built around a system that did not rely on orthodox wide men in the way English football traditionally had. That mattered enormously for Woody. He had developed into one of the country's most productive right-sided attackers, at almost exactly the moment England was reducing the importance of his position. Tony Currie later admitted he struggled to understand why his old teammate was never selected. To Currie, Woodward had the ability, the opportunity simply never came. Other explanations surfaced over the years. Some later accounts mentioned Woody's temperament. There were also supporter stories about a possible England B opportunity that never materialised. But neither has enough firm evidence to explain his exclusion with certainty. What can be said is simpler. Woodward was playing regularly in the First Division. He was scoring heavily. He was producing season after season. And England never gave him a single senior appearance. That left one of the biggest unanswered questions of his career. Was Alan Woodward overlooked because he wasn't good enough? Or because English football had stopped looking for the kind of winger he had become? By the mid-1970s, Alan Woodward had already given Sheffield United more than a decade of top-level service. He had been there for promotion. He had been there for the return to the First Division. He had been there when the Blades climbed as high as 6th in 1974-75, and when the team began to fall away, Woody stayed. That loyalty became part of his identity. It also raises one of the most interesting questions about his career. Did staying at Bramall Lane help make him a club legend, but stop him becoming a national one? Woodward had attracted interest from bigger clubs earlier in his career, but Sheffield United remained his home. He never chased the kind of transfer that might have put him into European competition or a title-winning side. That doesn't mean he lacked ambition, but it may have changed how history remembered him. In 1976, Tony Currie left Sheffield United for Leeds United. Woody remained. That same year, Woodward was made club captain. By then, he had already become one of the club's most durable and dependable players. He had also passed major post-war scoring landmarks. Even his versatility produced some unusual stories. On several occasions, Woodward had to take over in goal when Sheffield United lost their goalkeeper. Across roughly 160 minutes as an emergency keeper, he conceded only once. It was another example of a player who seemed capable of handling almost anything asked of him. But the wider story was turning. The side that had finished 6th was relegated just one season later. The great years were fading. Currie had gone. The club was changing. Woodward, however, remained until 1978. By then, his Sheffield United story was almost complete. He had become captain, record breaker, long-serving number 7, and one of the defining players of his era. But outside Sheffield, his reputation still seemed smaller than the career he had actually built. And when Woody finally left English football, the next chapter would take him somewhere completely unexpected. A later Sheffield Star retrospective reported that Woodward had left his wife and 2 children after beginning a relationship with a woman working as manager, Harry Haslam's secretary. Only weeks later, Woody left Bramall Lane and moved to America. He joined the Tulsa Roughnecks in the Nassau, where his extraordinary kicking power earned him the nickname the Boomer. His ability with a dead ball even took him into American football. In 1982, Woodward became a place kicker for the Oklahoma Thunder and finished as the team's league-leading scorer. America soon became home. In 1984, he established Tulsa Sheffield United FC, helping young players through coaching and training. He later spent around 20 years working for American Airlines, retiring in 2009. There was also a very old-school side to Woody. One player later coached by him remembered Woodward casually offering him a cigarette before putting the team through a hard training session. Away from the pitch, Woody was remembered as approachable and remarkably ordinary. When he died at his Oklahoma home on 21 May 2015, aged 68, he left behind 3 children, 3 stepchildren, and 8 grandchildren. Almost 4 decades had passed since he left Bramall Lane, but the real fans never forgot him. They remembered the goals, the thunderous strikes, the number 7 tearing down the right, and the extraordinary fact that a player of his quality never received a single senior England cap. Alan Woodward's wider reputation may have faded. His football did not. The people who watched Woody knew exactly how good he had been. Alan Woodward was more than a Sheffield United favourite. He was one of the most criminally underrated English footballers of his generation. Subscribe if you believe Alan Woodward deserves far more recognition than English football ever gave him.